Hello, welcome to Context. I'm Nadia Jani. On today's episode, we'll talk about US involvement in the South Caucasus and the US president's social media post. First, for context, President Donald Trump posted on his social media site Truth a video snippet of Azerbaijan President Ilham Aliyev praising Trump at the Shusha Global Media Forum. President Aliyev spoke of his gratitude for Trump, his positive involvement in the Caucasus, and their shared values. Trump posted the video on Tuesday, and President Aliyev responded with a post on X, stating his gratitude and Trump's partnership and commitment to a peace agenda. The US holds high interest in Azerbaijan, which is a crucial link connecting Central Asia, the Caspian Sea, and the Caucasus to Western markets. Also, the American-Israeli-Azerbaijan Corporation would benefit Washington's strategic interest in the region. Earlier, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan emphasized the strategic importance of Zangezur corridor, stating that it would not only benefit Azerbaijan, Armenia and Turkey, but also broader regional economies. At the three-day Shusha Global Media Conference, President Aliyev mentioned that the Zangezur corridor would not have any third-party involvement. Today on Context, I am joined by Ambassador Bryza, former US diplomat and ambassador to Azerbaijan, and Nargiz Mammadova, an expert in international relations at STEM Center in Baku. Welcome to you both. Nargiz, I just want to start with you firstly. My question is, why do you think there is a renewed interest from the US in the South Caucasus?
Well, it will be not a surprise if we talk about US. The US always have interest in South Caucasus because South Caucasus is very hard and complicated geopolitical place in the global policy, in the global geopolitics, and we are surrounded by big countries like Russia, Iran, Turkey, and from the other side we have Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. They're all the Central Asia, and the South Caucasus is kind of bridge, the political, economical, cultural bridge between Asia and Europe, and that's why the US interest is always was and now and will be there. It's obvious, but I will think that regarding Azerbaijan-US relations is that it's giving a new positivity impact when the Trump's administration came to power, when he became president, and actually it's quite good. It's quite good that we have some dialogue with US, as well as US have some dialogue with Armenia, or minimal, but I still think that they have some dialogue with Georgia. And I think that, also we live in a very complicated world where the Russia-Azerbaijan relations are not in the good phase. The Azerbaijan-Iranian relations always fluctuated, and the US has, of course, interest and uses all the chances to be in the South Caucasus. It's the games of international relations, as we know from the theory of international relations. Big powers like US, Russia, now China, they all have interest in South Caucasus. I think that it's very obvious, and it's not something that coming out of nowhere.
Definitely. And how important would you say is the Zangezur corridor to Azerbaijan and the wider economy?
Well, for Azerbaijan, Zangezur corridor is strategically important. I think that from the perspective not only trans-logistical, and from the economical, from the view of everything, Zangezur corridor opens a new market not only for Azerbaijan, it opens a new market and new roads for Turkey and for Armenia and for other countries that not directly but indirectly linked to Zangezur corridor, that in future, after opening of Zangezur corridor, can be connected to middle corridor. And as we know, middle corridor is now growing growing its, let's say, status. It's due to the war in Ukraine, due to what's happening in Russia, and due to what's happening in the Middle East. The Middle Corridor is one of the strategically stable corridors that can evolve lots of the countries, and there are lots of perspectives. There's perspective of EU in the Middle Corridor called global gateways, and they pull lots so much and billions of euros on it. There also a perspective of US, the perspective of Russia, and the perspective of China, and all these perspectives connects or diverged in the South Caucasus and mainly in Azerbaijan.
Great. Ambassador Breiser, I'm sure you saw the Trump posted on his Truth social website of President Aliyev praising him and at the Shusha Global Media Forum. What do you think of that, and what is America's interest in Azerbaijan and the South Caucasus?
Well, Nargis has already talked about the U.S. interests in the South Caucasus, and it really began back during the administration of Bill Clinton, when we, together with the governments of Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, and national and private oil and gas companies like SOCAR and BP, worked together to develop the framework that allowed for the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline, the South Caucasus gas pipeline, the Baku-Supsa pipeline to come into being. And from then on, the United States had strategic focus on Azerbaijan. But lately, there hasn't been. And I think, the Trump administration, I know, does not have a strategic view about Azerbaijan or Armenia or Georgia or really any part of the world, because the foreign policy of the Trump administration is ad hoc and is not based on a systematic strategy. In fact, the Trump administration no longer even uses the old coordinating mechanism I was a part of for 4 years at the White House, the National Security Council staff, to make sure that all the various U.S. governmental ministries can debate a policy and come up with a consensus view and make recommendations to the president. That doesn't occur anymore. You simply have the president getting interested in a topic, maybe because he sees something in the media, or because one of his closest inner sanctum of advisors, rather than somebody in one of the ministries, has a proposal. So I think that's what's happening now. I think, President Trump is driven by, first of all, compliments. He likes when people say nice things about him. So President Aliyev said very nice things about President Trump, that President Trump is for peace and he's a new kind of leader. I think someone on President Trump's staff noticed that. That's point one. Point two is President Trump has made very clear that he wants a Nobel Peace Prize. And so, that when Prime Minister of Israel Netanyahu visited the Oval Office several days ago, or weeks ago, he presented President Trump with Netanyahu's letter nominating Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. Trump wants either to get a Nobel Peace Prize from bringing an end to Israel's war in Gaza, or from he had hoped a new nuclear deal with Iran, or maybe by hopping on at the last second here and helping Azerbaijan and Armenia finalize a peace treaty. And then the final point that gets President Trump's attention is what you mentioned before, the Zangezur corridor, where, as many of the viewers will remember, the Trump administration recently suggested, in the person of Ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barrack, that maybe a U.S. logistics company could operate or administer the Zangezur corridor as a neutral party, rather than having Russian FSB troops be the ones that would operate and provide security for the corridor. And that provision of Russian FSB troops dates back to an agreement or a statement by President Aliyev, Prime Minister Pashinyan of Armenia, and President Putin of Russia back on November 10th, 2020, at the ending of the Second Karabakh War. So for all those reasons, I think President Aliyev's kind words at the Shusha Media Forum caught President Trump's interest. But I wish it reflected a big strategic shift of the United States back toward the South Caucasus. But I'm afraid that is yet to happen. But this is maybe a very good starting point.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a really interesting point. And Nargiz, I'm just going to pick it up from there and ask you a question that was directed at President Aliyev about whether he will consider third-party control over the Zangezur corridor. He actually mentioned that there would be no foreign involvement on Azerbaijan's territory, but that doesn't necessarily apply to the Zangezur corridor, which is not in Azerbaijan's sovereignty. So do you think that that is something that he would allow?
Well, first start with the peace deal, even as an analyst, an expert, we started to think about peace building, about conflict resolution, about Zangezur corridor. We already said that Zangezur corridor shouldn't be a part of the peace deal. The peace deal, okay, it's outside, it's the opening all the communications, it's new diplomatic relations with Armenia, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But Zangezur corridor is a very special issue, I would say. And in this regard, okay, but it's not this part of the Azerbaijan, but it's a deal. We need to make this deal with Armenia because it's also in the favor of Armenia to be a part of the Zangezur corridor, to be open. If everything will be in a very positive way and Zangezur corridor will be open soon, it doesn't mean that lots of investment will come to the South Caucasus. No, yes, but not only to Azerbaijan, also to Armenia. Why not? We are always open to cooperation. The thing is that the Zangezur corridor, as I said before, is a deal, can be economic deal. I think that what the Ambassador Barak said is not just rumors. Maybe there was some negotiations about that. Maybe Azerbaijani side or Armenian side made other statements. I think that there was some negotiations, but we don't know detailed what's going on. And actually, I think that the last Abu Dhabi meeting between the president of Azerbaijan and the prime minister of Armenia, also they, I think, made some, maybe I can say, some good and positive statements about the peace deal, and also they talked about the Zangezur corridor. I think it's one of the strategic points of the future of South Caucasus, and I think that for now no third party cannot be not allowed to this territory, as we can see from the both sides.
Yeah, from both sides. So you would think that Armenia would also agree to no third-party involvement as well?
Yes, actually, why? Because I think that it was the Prime Minister's office. They made some statement. It was like the hidden context, like will not allow the third party through our territory. But it's also the point of Russia, and I don't know what Russia will think about it. We don't know actually. There were no clear statements about it, and it's very interesting why Russia putting everything aside now, and they try to act very neutral, which is very, very, strange, because while the declaration was signed on November 2020, they were part of these negotiations, and it was signed not only between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Russia was also involved in these negotiations as a mediator, as a part, however you call, but they were involved, and now they are like aside, and it's very strange and unusual.
Yeah, definitely. Ambassador Breiser, just in regards to that, would you think that the US would be interested in becoming, a part of the Zangezur corridor in commercial involvement, do you think? Would that be an opportunity for Trump?
Yeah, I don't think there's any strategic interest in this at all, to be honest, by the United States. It's not like the old days when we had a very clear policy. No, I think this is an instance of, again, as I was saying before, somebody around President Trump saying, hey, just like in Ukraine, we used a commercial agreement or a commercial deal that would involve U.S. companies, i.e. U.S. companies get to exploit Ukraine's critical minerals. Well, we could do the same thing in the South Caucasus and have a U.S. company run that corridor. And so, the way Ambassador Barak described it was clearly like a real estate deal. He said a U.S. company could lease the corridor, lease the territory of the corridor for 100 years. That leads to the statements by both President Aliyev and, as Nargis was saying, the Prime Minister's press spokesperson, shortly after Ambassador Barak made that proposal, which was that leasing the territory is not possible. In other words, the sovereign control of the territory of the corridor on Armenian soil cannot change. It's sovereign Armenian territory, and I think part of the corridor will be on Azerbaijani territory because the corridor should eventually extend all the way to Turkey. And so now President Aliyev is saying the same thing with regard to Azerbaijan's territory, that the corridor must remain sovereign territory of Azerbaijan. I take that as a positive statement, a supportive statement by President Aliyev to align Azerbaijan's policy with Armenia's. And a few weeks ago, when the Armenian Prime Minister's office said, we won't allow our territory to be leased, many commentators in Azerbaijan took that as a sign that Pashinyan, the Prime Minister of Armenia, was being uncooperative. So now President Aliyev is taking the same position. Again, I take that as a statement of goodwill by President Aliyev that underscores his commitment to finalize overall the peace treaty with Armenia, even if, as Nargis said, the Zangezur corridor is a separate thing.
That's really interesting. And in regards to that then, obviously the relationship with the US and Azerbaijan, do you think that this relationship could grow into something even more powerful or something even more positive? What do you think the current relationship is and what could it be in the future?
Yeah, I think it could grow into something more. As I was saying, there's no real strategic partnership anymore between the U.S. and Azerbaijan. There used to be. I was a part of it for many, many years. But the U.S. under Trump doesn't think in that way. The U.S. now thinks about countries as friendly or unfriendly based upon whether or not the U.S. has a trade surplus or trade deficit with them, largely. So there's this long history previously, in previous administrations, especially the administrations of Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, of partnership between the U.S. and Azerbaijan and the countries of the South Caucasus. So there's something to build on. And now there's the attention of President Trump having been grabbed by President Aliyev and by the Zangezur corridor idea. I think the issue of whether or not the land can be leased for the corridor is not an important one. That can be worked through in a way that satisfies the governments of both Azerbaijan and Armenia. And if and when that happens, yes, I think we will see U.S. relations with Azerbaijan and with Armenia as well improve.
Yes, definitely. And Nargis, that same question to you. Do you think a U.S. partnership with the South Caucasus could be a positive step in the right direction?
Well, I think that yes, as the Ambassador Bryza said before, the U.S. policy, foreign policy now didn't have 100% direction towards the South Caucasus because there are lots of other issues in the world like the Gaza-Ukrainian conflict and etc. However, the conflict in Azerbaijan, I mean the Karabakh conflict, ended, so there's a no conflict and there's now a peace negotiations going on, and now the both sides working on it. If US can help by any means, it will be great, I think. Why not? And but I think that now it's time for the both sides to talk face to face. And I was very pleased that the meeting in Abu Dhabi happened. And I'm also very pleased that it can also impact to the relations, to the normalization of relations between Armenia and Turkey, because it's first of all in the interest of Armenia to build a good relationship with Turkey. And I think that after, when everything like the peace deal will be signed, I think that we will see a new waves of the U.S. interest in the South.
That's interesting. And I think just on obviously the peace deal and agreement with Armenia and Azerbaijan, as you mentioned, if things were to obviously progress in the right direction, do you think Iran would have a problem with that? Just because with the Zangezur corridor, it might shut out their access to Armenia. Do you think that would be a problem for them?
Iran now, in a very thin layer of the things that's going on inside of the country. And I think that Azerbaijan always have some diplomatic, let's say, ways to talk with Iran. And even what happened before in the relations between Azerbaijan and Iran, we tried to be stable with our neighbors. But we know the red line, it's very important. We know the red line. If Iran wants the prosperous region of South Caucasus, they need to agree that this peace deal and the opening of Zangezur corridor should be a priority for the stability and for the prosperity of all three major countries in the South Caucasus.
Okay, Ambassador Breiser, my last question to you would be, how would you actually help to inform President Donald Trump in his strategy in regards to the South Caucasus? What would your advice be?
Pay attention. But that'll be falling on deaf ears. He is not a strategic thinker. So I guess, but given where we are, I would probably tell him, look, you've got a chance to succeed with this Zangezur corridor. You should tell your advisors that they shouldn't talk about leasing the land, but they should listen to President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan, who say, you got to be clear that the Zangezur corridor will remain the sovereign territory of both Azerbaijan and Armenia. And then I would also advise him to have his chosen envoy, whether it be Steve Witkoff, who visited Azerbaijan, or Ambassador Barak, who's getting a bigger and bigger regional role, to do whatever they can to support President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan, but not as a mediator. Not as a mediator. The leaders don't need mediators, but come up with a way to get the U.S. government to prepare to support the implementation of a peace treaty.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you to both of our guests, Ambassador Breiser and Nargiz Mammadova, for joining us on Context. That's all that we have for you on this episode. I'm Nadia Jani. Stay tuned to A News.